Hello, welcome back. Today I wanted to talk about fear and love. I've done a few little notes to kind of orient my little ramble today, so it should hopefully be less tangential, but I don't make any promises. Um, anyway, enough jibber jabber. I want to sort of fly into it. Um, fear and love, they are these very central polarities to our emotional experience. They do certainly orient a lot of the way we engage with the world, the way that we perceive the world. And I think it's important to pay attention to them, to the way in which we experience them, the way in which they influence our actions in the world. And I think in general, people want to cultivate a sort of movement towards love in the way they relate to themselves and the way they relate to other people. But we can often, especially today in our modern sort of psychological environments, fear is a very powerful factor that is often imposed on us by the outside, from the news we immerse ourselves in, from our educational systems. Fear is a very powerful emotion to drive certain action, but it doesn't really drive what I would say is the sort of actions and feelings that really make us flourish as beings. Fear is really a contraction of consciousness. It's a shrinking, it's a retreating, and it's something that triggers our sort of primordial stress response. It sort of attunes us to threats and dangers in the world, and because of this, it really inhibits our ability to properly play, to properly explore, because we feel the world is unsafe, and therefore we need to retreat to a kind of sense of safety, a sense of security. And anyone who's had their stress response sort of triggered by anything, which I'm sure is pretty much everyone listening to this, that experientially it's a very sharp and contracted state. You are very focused, your attention is very attuned. You'll have your heart beating faster, as your body is trying to prepare blood flow to, trigger that sort of fight or flight sort of reaction. And it's this experience of attention is different to what I'm going to talk about with love and how love affects your attention. In states of fear, your attention is oriented to the world with a very negative valence and a negative emotional tone. You're not feeling euphoric. You're not feeling safe and happy and eager. You're really just thinking first and foremost about your survival. And it retracts your consciousness back to your ego, back to your sense of being an organism, of being separate to a dangerous and chaotic world. And you can only really, therefore, in such a stressed state, you can only focus on yourself, your ability to be altruistic. Like me, sometimes I just can't say anything. Your ability to lend help, care, attention to anyone outside of yourself. I'm just going to check if my microphone is on. It is on. Good. I don't want to record this and see that it's been off. I've done that before. It's a little bit frustrating, but yeah, your ability to really attend to the world in a caring manner is totally evaporated when you're in that stressed, in that fearful state. And when you really think about all this, you can understand why fear is such a powerful emotion that politicians, certain totalitarian states will often leverage in order to manipulate the masses, to manipulate the population. There will sort of, you see this in so many different things. Use some examples. We'll have some fear of, immigration, of immigrants, fear of the other, something that is unknown, unfamiliar, and politicians love to harness this sort of fear because it galvanizes a population, and it gets them swept up in this fervor and this anger, and that's why politicians, practitioners of the dark magics, they understand this energy very, very closely, and it's sad. It's sad, really, and often fear, say with terrorism, which is a one of the central sort of events and things that states will sort of stir up to sort of get people to think that the world is unsafe, that there's this threat of the other, this dangerous entity, whether it's the Taliban, ISIS, some nefarious other who can strike at any moment, and they will use this to put people in that state of fear, to make people yearn for safety, for a sense of security, and that's the psychological that's the psychological state that they're trying to tap into to, say, justify certain more control measures, to sort of pull society more in the direction of a control society where they can have more mass surveillance, less freedoms for individuals. The way they do this is to make people feel as though they can't trust another person. And that's really a tragic thing. You see it, say, in a, to use an example, think of my brain is blurring on hitchhiking. That's the word I was trying to find. Which used to be a very prevalent thing in America. From the 60s, 70s, and whatnot. People, to get from one place to another, they'll, put their thumb out at the end of the road and they'll get a lift from a stranger. And there's that in that sort of act, there's that trust, there's that cooperation, that community of, just lending assistance to another. But then, obviously, you saw in the news the very high-profile cases of murders and serial killers who would target hitchhikers, and that aroused a deep state of fear. And here's the thing, these high-profile cases, they're not necessarily a representation of the true probability, the true frequency that, when you hitchhike, you're gonna get fucking murdered. It's probably a very, very rare case, and probably, perhaps even rarer even today. But because people can bring to their mind these very emotionally arousing, very scary events, we have a certain availability bias that we're not going to bring to our mind all the countless cases of hitchhikes which were perfectly fine, but two strangers just joined in an act of true altruism. They bring to their mind the extremely rare but often gruesome and violent cases, and then as a result of that, as those sort of stories proliferate in the culture, hitchhiking is now virtually absent. There's such a deep decay of social capital, of social trust. People look upon another not as another potential friend, but as a potential threat. And that's how you cripple slowly the trust in a society. And obviously for everyone in society, that's not advantageous, but for the certain leaders and elites who want to rule through the emotion of fear, rule through instilling these sorts of emotions in the population, such that they crave an illusory kind of security. That's how they do it. That's how they create those sorts of sentiments and moods within the media. because the media is, of course, the inputs that people have to develop their models of the world. And if the inputs are of these, horror movie cases, of these serial killers, and all this sort of stuff, which is very emotionally arousing, but often very irrational kind of mental forces, it it yeah it doesn't lead us to open to one another in terms of love. It really retreats us, it contracts us, and so I think we need to sort of pay attention to those sort of emotions of contraction. Pay attention to those emotions that well up when you look upon another and you're looking upon them in terms of potential danger, as opposed to, just you in another life. Now, this isn't to say that you should be naive and not pay attention to the potential dangers within the world, because there certainly are. There are dangers, but you should have discernment. You shouldn't look upon the world entirely with a blanket of threat, but understand that there's ambiguity in the world. And but yeah, fear is something that is dark and clouding. It obscures light. It doesn't open it in. And this is obviously in opposition to love, which is the other dimension of this polarity of love and fear. Love is often described as light. It sort of illuminates and it provides clarity and knowledge and understanding. It is the polar opposite almost. And love is often sort of described as a sort of expansion of consciousness, and it's an expansion of consciousness into play, into exploration, into safety. You can only really play when you feel safe, and you see this especially with children. Depending on what sort of attachment style they have with their pet, their caregiver. Do they have a secure attachment? Do they have an insecure attachment? You know, you often see differences in the play behavior of children depending on what is the strength of their attachment. When they have a secure foundation, a secure attachment with a reliable, trusting, and nourishing caregiver, that gives them the foundation where they can go out into the world and explore and make sort of, exploration is inherently kind of risky behavior, but we need to do it in order to engage with the friction of life to grow and develop. But when a child, say, has an insecure foundation, say an inconsistent, a sort of emotionally cold and non-nurturing kind of caregiver, they don't have that clear foundation. They don't have that safety that they can retreat to, and that totally, incapacitates their ability to play. And play is so important for animals, for mammals like us. We need it to, really enjoy the qualities of life, I think. And I think as well, love it's not a conceptual thing. It's a raw, intuitive, and unconditioned thing. It exists prior to conditions. It exists prior to limits. And I think we limit love when we approach ourselves and others with agendas, conditions, and expectations. If you say, look at a child where, they're in such an unconditioned kind of state, they often do stuff, they often play, not for anything that they may get out of it, but they do it for the sake of playing, just for the love, for the bliss of it, you know. And this is why I say that true love is done for the sake of loving. It's not done for anything that you may get out of it, any sort of expectation or some kind of idea of benefit. That's when you expect something from it, you are limiting it, And this is why sort of attention is a very foundational component of the experience of love. And I set this up in opposition to fear, where fear directs attention towards safety, towards escaping a certain threat. It's very focused and turns you in a real pinhole directed kind of form of attention. The attention, when it's a loving act, is more of an expansion, it's more of an openness, it's more diffuse, it's less focused in this kind of pursuit. It's more just open to the world simply as it is, without a desire to change it or conform it to any kind of egocentric desire system, And Simone Weil, who's a French philosopher and mystic, she describes true attention as the rarest and purest form of generosity. And you give this form of attention, this kind of act of love, when you look at the world with no expectation, when you look at it simply as it is, without a desire to change, like I just said. And I find it's a tragedy of our modern kind of narcissistic world, when we often do look at one another, particularly in romantic relationships, in terms of what we can get from them. Obviously, there should be certain expectations, certain mutual obligations of, sharing in love. But when we look at another in terms of what we can get from them, this is not love, and sometimes it can, especially when you think in terms of power dynamics, and in terms of what you can manipulate, and chasing this treadmill of more and more power, which is a futile kind of endeavor. Often it can lead people to look at relationships, when relationships are looked up in terms of power, as opposed to just sharing, cooperation, and love. It can lead people to really treat another as a pawn, as something to manipulate, as a toy, which is something that's very, very much distorting socio-sexual relationships in our society. I think you have all these games that people play with one another to try and coerce the other person into what they want, and it's just a profound perversion of love. It's not love. It's not it at all. When you're playing these sort of weird kind of games and stuff, you're not seeing another entity with a rich and vibrant inner life. You're really seeing a narcissistic extension of yourself. And this is something that's just really all too common today, and it's something that I'll probably talk more about it in the future, particularly about how relationship dynamics in our sort of modern modern cultural moment is it's something that's in profound need of healing and addressing. But I'll park that for another discussion. Fundamentally, when you attend to another, you are giving conscious space to them. And when you do this act of attention, not for yourself, but merely to listen, as an act of simple care, and the simplicity is the important thing here. You are really nourishing another soul with the rarest and purest form of generosity. And attention in such a case is an act of love, And, this is why I repeat so vociferously the importance of attention, the importance of mindfulness, the importance of looking at the agendas and models that you carry into reality that are directing your attention to the world, what you're trying to get out of it, and if you look at your relationships in terms of what can I get out of it, as opposed to this is another life form. And this is something that this is the person that I care about, that I want to provide value to, that I want them to flourish. You know, you are limiting your ability to really feel love when when you condition it, when you limit it, when you only drip it out for what you might get. You know, that's not love, and you are clouding yourself. You know, you're pulling the scales over your eyes, and it's you know, in such cases, you really do need to sort of analyze your way of seeing and the way that you're loving, because love is not just something that's for other people; it's for all the things you do. You know, do you love your work? Do you love your hobbies? Do you love things you do that you fill your day with? Do you love your food? Yeah, I think something to think about. Uh, anyways, enjoy the rest of your day.